Mary Grace Ketner is a long-term Unitarian Universalist from San Antonio. Described as an ace storyteller, deviser of doggerel and ditties, wannabe artist, recovering pushover, lobbyer on behalf of fairy tales and social justice. I think she came up with this description of herself. She's a member of, for many years, she's been a member of several storyteller associations, and that is a great, great talent she does have. I have known her for over 3 decades and 2 previous Unitarian Universalist churches. I can well attest to her talent. This morning she will enlighten us with the tale of Michael Servetus, Renaissance man, activist, and author, and an earliest founder of Unitarianism. We will discover that we UUs have a true martyr in our heritage. He was also a role model, a pace setter for the stubborn UU nerds of today.
Thank you, Joan. Yes, we used to play hopscotch on Joan's mother's sidewalk together 30 years ago. I'd like to tell you a story today about one of our ancestors, one of those old-time Unitarians from back before we had a capital U in our name. His name was Michael Servetus. UU minister Steve Eddington has said that if he were a filmmaker, he would tell the story of Michael Servetus in flashback, beginning at the end. The movie that he imagines would begin on a black screen that says October 27th, 1553, Geneva, Switzerland. And then we see the sun coming up over 16th century Geneva, move in for a tight shot of a jail from which a bedraggled, chained prisoner is being led forth by a guard and a clergyman to whom the prisoner pays no attention. They proceed to the center of town where a crowd is gathering around a large pile of freshly cut boughs with a stake in the middle. The prisoner is tied to the stake. His books are tied to his waist, and he is given one last chance to recant his heresy, which he refuses to do. The fires are lit. Going by what I know of this incident, Reverend Eddington says, I'd have the condemned man, Michael Servetus, cry out, "Oh, Jesus, Son of the eternal God, have mercy upon me." The next scene would show a conversation later in the day between the attending clergyman, one Guillaume Farel, and the reformer, John Calvin, in which Mr. Farel recalls Servetus' final words and remarks to Calvin that if only Servetus had called Jesus the eternal Son of God rather than the Son of the eternal God, he could have saved himself from the flames. For that was indeed Servetus' capital crime. He believed Jesus to be the Son of God, but not God himself, as the Christian doctrine of the Trinity holds. Sounds like a compelling few opening scenes to me. So who was this Michael Servetus? To find out, I read what turned out to be more chapters than I had expected to have to read from the History of Unitarianism by Earl Morse Wilbur, an amazing theologian and scholar who served as president of what is now our Star King School for the Ministry. And as I read, my image of Michael Servetus, our hero, being played by, I don't want to spill my water, being played by Daniel Day-Lewis, turned into an image of Michael Servetus starring Jim Parsons. You know, Sheldon Cooper on The Big Bang Theory. Yes, Servetus was a passionate intellectual, a nerd actually. He studied things out to the nth degree, and he often got on people's nerves by wanting to argue them out to the nth degree too. More than once, he was thrown out of town. The man we call Michael Servetus was born Miguel into the fairly well-off Serveto family in the city of Villanova in Aragon in 1511. As a teenager in the 1520s, he studied under a monk named Juan Quintana, and later he went to the University of Toulouse in France to study law. It was there that he first read the Bible. Yes, that struck me as odd too, that an educated person should first encounter the Bible in college. The truth is, the Gutenberg Bible in Latin had only been out for 3/4 of a century. It was published in 1450 on that new invention, the printing press. There just weren't that many Bibles around. Religion had always been taught orally. So Miguel had learned the Bible and all about baptism and the Trinity and the devil straight from the mouths of churchmen who had learned it from other churchmen or from tediously handwritten copies cloistered away in far monasteries where they couldn't be read on a regular basis. And when he did read the Bible, he noticed immediately that there was no mention of the Trinity, the triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. That was not biblical. He got excited about that. You see, in his homeland in Spain, there were many secret Muslims and secret Jews hidden away since 1492. In fact, some 800,000 Jews and many thousand Moors had been banished from Spain or burned at the stake. Many came to the New World, unwilling to convert to Christianity. Those living secret lives might be very content to convert if they had only been given the truth, that like their own religion, Christianity was a religion of one God. Why had the church been pushing this confusing idea of the Trinity for so long? It was clearly untrue, and it was clearly putting a damper on the spread of the true faith. One God? Hundreds of thousands of Jews and Muslims confessing your religion anew? Maybe no one had ever connected those two ideas, but what a concept, he thought. Now, I understand how a young fella could think they were the first to discover something. Even a child could think that. Why, I remember being made to take out the trash when I was about 5 or 6 years old, and picking up the bathroom trash, I noticed the toilet. And I thought, I could just dump it in there and flush. Why had no one ever thought of that before? Here we had been carrying the trash all the way outside to the curb when we could just flush it away. My parents are going to think I am so smart. So I dumped and flushed and watched. And then my mother came in. And that plumber could have been nicer about it too. Anyway, I think that's what happened to Miguel. He thought he'd discovered something new, and he thought all he had to do was tell people about it, and they would be as excited as he was. Well, in 1529, about 2 years into his studies, Miguel was called home to accompany his old teacher, Juan Quintana, to the coronation of Carlos V, Charles V of Spain, as Holy Roman Emperor. They traveled to Bologna, Italy, where he saw for the first time the riches of the church, the adoration accorded the Pope, and the worldliness of the priesthood, avarice, jealousy, all kinds of immorality. He watched as Carlos kissed the feet of the Pope, and the Pope placed a golden crown on his head. Miguel couldn't stand it. All of this was in stark contrast to the purity and simplicity he had seen in the Bible. So it wasn't long before he dropped out of the emperor's entourage in disgust and fled northward towards the lands where reformers such as Jan Hus and Martin Luther had already planted some seeds of protest against the evils of the church. And in the year 1531, he wrote his first book on the errors of the Trinity, in Latin, of course. And he found a printer for it in Strasbourg. In its 238 small pages, he did not actually deny all concept of the Trinity. He just explained what he thought were errors in the understanding on the part of the church. He noted how, though indeed a Father and a Son and a Holy Spirit were there, the latter two were not eternal. For the Son had only been born at a much later time, not to mention that he died. And the Holy Ghost had only arrived at the death of the Son. Jesus was divine, as are all children of God. He just acted godlier than most of us are able to do on a continuous basis. It's important to realize how sincere Miguel was about this. If people only knew the truth, well, they'd understand. Our last few years of politics have shown this not to be true, even in our own time. And he thought they'd be appreciative, even grateful at hearing the truth. He was, after all, only 20 years old. Even so, his book was read by many important theologians, and though he failed to win many over in great numbers, many of the points he made caused the various reformers to find new ideas to disagree with each other about. Under pressure, Servetus wrote and published another small book that was ostensibly to be a retraction, but it turned out to just be a more polite version of what he'd said in his first book. And while the Protestant reformers in German-speaking lands patiently discussed and argued his views, the Catholics in Spain ordered him to appear before the Inquisition, and one French city sent out a decree for his arrest. And so he found himself on the road again. He slipped away to Lyon, where he changed his name to Michel de Villeneuve, and he found employment as a corrector. Corrector was the perfect job for our Michael. It would have been the perfect job for Sheldon Cooper, don't you think? He was the kind of person who loved finding things wrong with what other people said and correcting them. And soon he made his mark in the fields of science, geography, astrology, and medicine. And he began to lecture in those fields. But he was not exactly a campus favorite. After a few years, he moved to Paris just ahead of the Tar and Feather Committee to study and lecture at the College of the Lombards. It may have been here that he discovered that the blood of the heart circulates through the lungs when passing through the right ventricle to the left, a correction to the ancient theory of Galen, father of physiology, whose book he was correcting. And a very important discovery indeed. In fact, it was incorporated by William Harvey in his 17th century work on circulation. But Michel could not leave. Let's see. I'm sorry. Throughout his time in France, our Michel, worked as a corrector. He was even assigned to correcting a translation of the Bible. And that may be what got him started thinking again about his passion, the failings of the church in view of the Bible's meanings and teachings. He became known as a religious humanist, viewing Jesus as a Son of God, a human being who lived out the godliness that is in all of us. And actually, that was no big deal among the other doctors in France. But Michel could not leave well enough alone. He started a correspondence with John Calvin, the new leader of the Protestant Reformation who lived in Geneva, Switzerland. He still believed in the power of his ideas, and he thought that if he could find just the right argument, Calvin would get it, and then Calvin could lead Christianity to a more enlightened understanding of principles and values. Well, Calvin played along for a while, but soon enough, he quit answering Michel's mail. But you will not be surprised that the good Dr. Villeneuve got in trouble again with his colleagues. He was practicing astrology and selling horoscopes on the side. Is it just me, or does he seem like he's asking for trouble? So he's a fugitive once more. He wound up in the French town of Vienne, and there he practiced as a physician, and in his spare time he began writing a little book boldly called The Restoration of Christianity. In this, Servetus' final work, he set forth his whole plan for a thorough reformation of Christianity by restoring the doctrine and teaching of the Christian religion to their original form. Well, when that book came out, Calvin recognized the arguments and the writing, even though it was under a different name, not Villeneuve, but Servetus. And then he turned the book over, and on the back there was an etching of the author, Michael Servetus, Michel Villeneuve. Aha, Calvin said, I knew it. So it was probably Calvin who let the inquisitor in Paris know of Servetus' publication. He was picked up, he was imprisoned, and tried there in Paris. Now, trial doesn't mean trial as we know it. One was not innocent until proven guilty. One was assumed guilty and then pressured or tortured to confess, or in the case of heretics, to recant. Servetus, however, saw it as a chance to put forward his truth, at last an opportunity. But then he learned that the judge intended to execute him no matter what. And so, by a trick, Servetus escaped. Here's the trick. He put his pajamas on over his clothes, and then he asked the guard if he could go outside to pee. But that didn't stop the trial. It continued for weeks without him. He was convicted as a heretic, and it was ordered that as soon as he was found, he should be fined and also burned with his books. And just to be sure, they burned him in effigy. Oddly, though, that verdict came after he had been actually burned at the stake in Geneva. Because after shedding his pajamas, Servetus planned to escape to Italy, a place where he hadn't gotten in trouble yet. And in doing so, he passed through Geneva on a Sunday, and he went to Calvin's own church. Don't get ahead of me now. He was recognized and arrested that same day. Don't you wonder sometimes how a person can be so right about some things, but so wrong about others? So there was another one of those trials. And as you saw in the opening movie, it ended very badly for our Michael. What I think is that Servetus simply never believed that he would get a chance to explain himself and be proven correct. His Geneva trial went on for 2 months, during which time he was held in a cold and filthy prison where he was assaulted by rats and body lice, and he bitterly complained, but even so, He argued so valiantly against the assigned prosecutor that Wiley Calvin eventually decided to risk muddying his own hands as the prosecutor. Servetus knew his material, but Calvin knew politics, and he would not suffer a failure in this trial. Calvin had said months before to one colleague, that same cleric buddy in the movie, that if Servetus ever came to Geneva, he said, "If my authority is of any avail, I will not suffer him to get out alive." And Calvin was a man of his word. When Servetus was sentenced, he begged for death by the sword, lest the great suffering of death should lead him in desperation to retract what he believed to be true, and so lose his soul. That sounds like us to me, Unitarian Universalists, though I'm grateful that burning at the stake is no longer practiced. If you don't hold on to what you believe is true, it's your very soul that's at risk, your very self, your very essence. But Servetus's request was denied, and he was set aflame. Now I ask you, what is the relevance of this man's life to Unitarian Universalists today? Well, several things, but what Michael Servetus' story illustrates most strongly to me is our fourth principle. We affirm and promote the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Didn't you find yourself cheering him on as he explored the facts, determined the truth, and then tried as hard as any UU I know to just be able to discuss it? It's been said that if there were a highway sign that said heaven pointing north and discussion about heaven pointing south, the UUs would all go south. His story also reminds us as patriots of the danger of religion taking too great a hand in civic affairs. At that time, an attack on the church was an attack on the state. Servetus's is not the only 16th century biography whose life illustrates that ethic, but it's certainly one clear example of what often sent people to the New World, and a principle our nation is founded on, even though some people seem to have forgotten that lately. Beyond the philosophical connection, Servetus's death brought about something that his life may never have accomplished. The manner of his trial and death became a black mark on Calvin's reputation, and some who found it odious went off to Poland and Hungary with Servetus's ideas. Those are the border fringes of civilization in Europe, far from Rome and other capitals, and it's where our infant faith was given a name and a capital letter, Unitarian. And I'd like you to know one more interesting fact as well. We are not the only ones who care to examine the life of this man. There's an organization called the Michael Servetus Institute with headquarters located in Villanueva, Spain. You can Google it. It's a network of scholars with interest in Servetus. And I think you'll like the Institute's goals. They say, pursuant to Servetus's teachings, the Institute assumes as part of its mission the defense of the values and dignity inherent in any individual, the freedom of conscience and speech as a way to foster human beings' development, the need to practice tolerance and justice in human relations, the search for truth as the source of all knowledge, and the rejection of dogmatism by affirming reason within the framework of the humanistic principles. Do those ring a bell to you? If not, check out page Roman numeral X in the front of our hymnal. For our congregations and for our small denomination, it is good to remember that we are not striving alone in a mission such as this. And there is a long tradition, a heritage, and even a martyr to the cause. I love you, nerds and all, and sometimes especially our nerds. Let me leave you with a benediction. Because of those who came before, we are. In spite of their failings, we believe. Because of and in spite of the horizons of their vision, we too dream.